The highway stretched out in front of me, a silver ribbon under the late afternoon sun. My hands gripped the steering wheel harder than they needed to, but that was the only way to stop them from trembling. 3 weeks deep inside, a drug cartel's operations had left me with a constant hum of tension in my muscles, like a guitar string pulled too tight. When I'd first volunteered for the undercover assignment, I thought I knew what I was signing up for. I'd spent almost a decade in law enforcement, climbing my way up to captain in the department, earning the respect of my team and the trust of my superiors. But nothing, not even the violent streets I'd patrolled for years, had prepared me for what I'd seen on the inside. You can't fake the fear in your eyes when you're sitting across from a man who's already killed twice that week. You can't pretend your hands aren't shaking when you have to load his gun for him and pass it across the table, knowing your prints are now on a murder weapon. And you sure as hell can't let him see you hesitate when he asks you to help bury a body. I'd lived every second of those 21 days like it might be my last. Every meeting, every deal, every careless laugh I had to force. They all took something from me, but I told myself it was worth it. The intel we'd gathered would cripple their operations for months, maybe years, and I would finally go home. Home. The word had kept me sane in those sleepless nights. I pictured my wife, Emma, curled up on the couch with a blanket, her smile softening when I walked through the door. I pictured my younger brother Daniel stopping by for one of his random visits, still teasing me about being too serious, even after all these years. I'd missed birthdays, dinners, even our wedding anniversary because of this job. But this time would be different. This time I'd walk in with a story to tell, the kind that makes you feel proud to wear the badge. I was sure Emma would see that. As I pulled into our street, the late summer air smelled like freshly cut grass and barbecue smoke from somewhere down the block. It was so different from the metallic tang of fear and gunpowder I'd lived in for weeks that I had to stop for a moment, just to breathe it in. My house looked exactly the same. White siding, blue shutters, the flower bed Emma had planted in spring now in full bloom. I parked across the street. I didn't want to pull into the driveway just yet. There was something about this moment I wanted to stretch out, like holding the last note of a song. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out my service weapon. Habit. The weight of it was both familiar and grounding. I checked the magazine, full as always, and slid it back into the holster on my hip. Walking up the driveway, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Each step was one closer to normal life again. No more pretending, no more lies. Just my home, my wife, and a well-earned night's sleep in my own bed. I pushed the front door open quietly. Maybe I'd surprise her. Maybe she'd be in the kitchen, and I could sneak up, wrap my arms around her and watch that startled laugh escape her lips. But the house was quiet. Too quiet. I took a few steps inside, the soles of my boots muted against the hardwood. The living room was empty. The kitchen, too. I called her name softly. No answer. That's when I noticed it. The faint sound of movement upstairs. I climbed the staircase slowly, each creak of the wood sounding louder than it should have. My heart wasn't racing. Not yet. But something about the rhythm of those soft thuds above me set my instincts on edge. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched to the bedroom door. It was slightly ajar, just enough for a sliver of warm light to spill out. I reached for it without thinking, pushing it open the rest of the way. And there they were, Emma and Daniel. She was in our bed. He was wearing my uniform. For a second, my mind refused to connect the dots. I'd just come from 3 weeks of staring down men who would slit my throat without hesitation, and yet this froze me in place. My right hand rested near my holster, not because I wanted to draw it, but because I was suddenly aware of its weight. The gun was loaded. I was loaded, with anger, disbelief, and a cold, steady calm that surprised me. Daniel's eyes went wide. Emma gasped, clutching the blanket to her chest like that would hide the truth already burning into my brain. I didn't shout. I didn't pull the weapon. I just stood there letting the silence weigh on them like a sentence already passed. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady. Too steady. Get dressed, both of you. We're going to talk. It was the kind of tone I'd used in interrogation rooms, calm, unshakable, but leaving no room for argument. In that moment, I realized something. I'd faced death 3 times in the last month. I wasn't about to lose control now. Daniel scrambled to his feet first, the polished leather of my uniform boots catching the light as he swung his legs over the side of the bed. The fact that he had taken the time to put on my badge, my name tag, my captain's insignia, it hit harder than I expected. This wasn't just betrayal. This was impersonation. It was stepping into my skin like it was his right. Emma sat frozen, her eyes darting between me and him, as if weighing which one of us was more dangerous in that moment. I didn't move. My training told me that silence can be more disarming than any threat, so I let it stretch. Seconds became heavy. Daniel's voice cracked first. Mike, I held up a hand. Don't. Not yet. I stepped into the room, my boots sinking into the familiar carpet, the smell of Emma's perfume still faint in the air. My weapon was still holstered, but its weight at my side felt like an unspoken witness. They knew it was there. I knew it was there. And none of us needed to mention it. 3 weeks, I said finally, looking at Emma. I've been gone for 21 days. You knew where I was, you knew what I was doing, and you knew the risks. She swallowed hard. Mike, My voice cut through hers like a clean break. And you still did this. Daniel stepped forward slightly, like he thought he could shield her. It's not what you think. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Daniel, you're wearing my uniform. In my house, in my bed, with my wife. You tell me, what do you think I think? He looked down, the bravado evaporating. For the first time in his life, my little brother didn't have a comeback. I sat down in the chair by the window, the one I used to sit in while Emma read in bed. My hands rested on my knees, fingers still curled just enough to remind myself that my weapon was within reach. But I didn't want it. Not for this. Do you know what I've been doing for the past 3 weeks? I asked, my eyes fixed on Daniel. He hesitated. Undercover? Undercover, I repeated slowly, letting the word settle. Inside a cartel. Sitting across from people who could smell a lie faster than a dog smells fear. You ever wonder what it's like to have a man's hand on your shoulder, smiling while deciding if you live or die that day? Neither of them answered. I didn't expect them to. I thought about home every night, I continued, my voice low. I thought about what it would feel like to walk through that door and know I made it back. And this is what I came home to. Emma's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. She knew better than to reach for me now. I leaned forward slightly. Here's what's going to happen. You're both going to get dressed. Daniel, you're going to take off that uniform before you step out of this room. Then you're going to walk out of my house and you're not coming back. Ever. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. Emma, I said, finally letting her name out in the open, you're going to pack a bag. You can leave tonight or tomorrow morning, but you're leaving. She opened her mouth to speak, but I stopped her with a look. Not anger, not anymore. Just the kind of finality that comes after a long war when you realize the fight is over and you've already lost what mattered. I'm not yelling because I'm done, I said quietly. I'm not reaching for my gun because I don't need to. You've already done the damage, you've already ended it. They didn't argue. They didn't plead. In that silence, I realized they'd already been caught in their own minds long before I walked through that door. I stood, adjusting my holster out of habit, and walked past them toward the hallway. Halfway out the door, I paused. You know, I said without turning around, I faced killers these past 3 weeks and they never once made me feel small. Congratulations. You managed it in less than a minute. I didn't wait for a response. I walked downstairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. But my head was clear. I'd just closed the book on a chapter I never thought I'd have to write. In the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. Through the window, I could see the evening light stretching long shadows across the lawn. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked, Life was still going on outside as if mine hadn't just been cracked open. Upstairs, I heard the faint shuffle of footsteps and the muted sound of drawers opening and closing. It didn't matter anymore. They could take what they wanted. They'd already taken the only thing I can't replace. I thought about the badge on my chest and what it meant. Justice, integrity, honor. All words I'd lived by in my career. And now they'd become the only things I had left to hold on to. When they left, one after the other, without a word, I didn't follow them to the door. I just listened as it closed behind them. The silence that filled the house this time was different. Not suspicious, not tense, just empty. I sat at the kitchen table staring at my hands. Hands that had pulled suspects out of burning cars. Hands that had cuffed murderers. Hands that had held my wife during storms, both literal and figurative. And now, hands that had let go. That night, I didn't sleep in the bed upstairs. I stayed on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional groan of the house settling. The weapon stayed on the coffee table in front of me, untouched. It wasn't until just before dawn that I realized something. For 3 weeks, I'd been ready to die for the job, but it was coming home that nearly killed me. The morning after they left, the house felt like a museum of someone else's life. Everything was still there. The pictures on the walls, the smell of coffee grounds in the jar, the jacket Emma used to hang on the back of the kitchen chair. But now those things belonged to a version of me that no longer existed. I brewed coffee anyway, more out of habit than desire. As it dripped, I found myself staring at the framed photo on the counter, the one of me, Daniel, and Emma at a 4th of July barbecue 3 summers ago. Daniel's arm was slung around my shoulders, Emma's hand resting lightly on my chest. We looked happy. Not the kind of happiness you fake for a camera, but the easy kind that comes from believing the ground beneath you is solid. I carried the mug to the couch and sat, letting the steam rise into my face. My mind drifted backward. Daniel and I were 6 years apart. I was the serious one, the one who followed rules and made plans. He was impulsive, reckless, but somehow always charming enough to get out of trouble. When our father died, I was 17. Daniel was just 11. I promised my mother I'd look after him, that I'd be the one to keep him from going off the rails. And for a while I did. I taught him how to drive, helped him get his first job, covered for him when he stayed out too late. I thought we were closer than most brothers, not perfect but solid. I met Emma when I was 25, already climbing the ranks in the department. She was warm, quick to laugh, and had a stubborn streak that matched mine. Daniel liked her immediately. The three of us shared holidays, Sunday dinners, and too many nights where laughter spilled out of the living room until well past midnight. Now looking back, I couldn't pinpoint when the cracks started to form. Maybe they'd been there all along, hairline fractures under the surface. Or maybe they appeared slowly, in the moments I wasn't paying attention, when I was at work late, or halfway across the state on a case, or sitting in some dingy motel room building a cover story instead of a marriage. The coffee tasted bitter, but I drank it anyway. By mid-morning, I found myself in the garage, opening boxes I hadn't touched in years. Inside one was my old academy graduation photo. I was 22, standing ramrod straight, my uniform crisp, my eyes bright. I could almost hear my father's voice in my head, telling me I'd made him proud. Next to it was another photo, me and Daniel fishing at a lake when he was a teenager. He'd caught the bigger fish that day, and he'd lorded it over me for years. I smiled despite myself, but the weight in my chest didn't lift. I knew the department would be expecting me back soon. I'd already filed my post-operation report before leaving headquarters the day before. They'd want to debrief, maybe assign me back to regular duties. But the idea of stepping into the station, seeing my badge on the desk, pretending everything was fine, I wasn't sure I had it in me yet. Instead, I took a drive. The streets were quiet, the early sunlight glinting off storefront windows. Without meaning to, I ended up in front of my mother's old house. It had been sold years ago, but seeing it brought back a flood of memories. Daniel and I racing bikes in the driveway, Emma helping Mom plant flowers in the front yard, summer nights sitting on the porch watching fireflies. I sat there for a long time, engine idling, wondering how many of those memories were still mine to keep, and how many had been poisoned by what I'd seen upstairs the night before. When I finally pulled away, I drove toward the river. It was a place I went when I needed to think, a quiet bend in the water where the city noise faded, and the only sounds were birds and the slow lap of the current against the bank. I sat on the hood of the car, watching the water move. My mind kept circling the same thought. I'd faced danger my entire career, but betrayal was different. A bullet or a knife. You see it coming. You can dodge it, block it, fight back. But this came from people you'd already let inside your guard. As I watched the river, I realized something else. My weapon had never left its holster last night, not because I lacked the opportunity, but because deep down, I knew violence wouldn't fix what they'd broken. The kind of wound they'd left wasn't one you could close with a trigger pull. Still, part of me wanted answers. Not the why. I didn't think they could give me one that mattered. But the how. How long? How often? How did Daniel justify wearing my uniform in my own home? Did he think it was a joke? Did he think it made him closer to me, or was it his way of erasing me? Those questions followed me back to the house. They followed me into the shower, where I scrubbed hard enough to feel raw. They followed me into the kitchen, where I reheated leftovers I barely tasted. That night, I sat at the table with a notepad and a pen, something I hadn't done in years. I started writing, not for a report, not for evidence, but for myself. I wrote about the mission, about the cartel, about the way the leader's eyes narrowed when he tested me. I wrote about the drive home, the smell of summer air, the way my hand brushed the grip of my weapon without me even thinking. And then I wrote about the moment I opened the bedroom door. I wrote until my hand cramped. When I was done, I tore the pages out, folded them, and put them in the bottom drawer of my desk. Not to forget, I knew I never would, but to make sure the memory didn't rot inside me. As I turned off the light and headed for the couch again, I realized tomorrow would be different. Not easier, not cleaner, but different. Because tomorrow, I'd start figuring out what life looked like without the people I thought would be there until the end. 2 days passed before I answered the phone. It was the chief, his voice low but firm. "Mike, we need you in today. There's paperwork, a debrief, and you've got guys here who want to see you." I stared at the empty coffee mug in my hand. "Yeah," I said finally. "I'll be there." Hanging up, I glanced toward the hallway where my uniform hung. Not the one Daniel had worn. That had gone straight into a trash bag and out to the curb. But my real one. The one I'd earned. I ran my fingers over the fabric, feeling the weight of the badge, the stitched letters spelling out my name. Capt. Michael Rourke. It had been years since I'd put it on without thinking about Emma's eyes watching me. This time there was no audience. Just me, the mirror, and a man trying to see if he still fit the skin he'd built for himself. The drive to the station was familiar, but every intersection felt like a checkpoint. I caught myself scanning rooftops, side streets, parked cars, habits from the cartel job that hadn't worn off yet. When I pulled into the lot, a few of the guys from my unit were out front leaning against a cruiser. They straightened when they saw me. "Captain," one of them said with a nod. "Good to have you back." I returned the nod. Good to be back. The lie came easier than I expected. Inside, the smell of burnt coffee and old paper hit me like a memory. I walked past desks cluttered with case files, radios chattering in the background. A couple of younger officers gave me that quick, curious glance, and the one that says they've heard rumors but won't ask. The chief was waiting in his office. He closed the door behind me and motioned for me to sit. "Hell of a job you did," he said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Your intel's already put 2 of their mid-level guys in cuffs. You'll be seeing your name in the internal memo this week." I nodded, flipping through the reports. The photos of seized weapons and drugs should have given me a sense of accomplishment. Instead, all I felt was distance. "You holding up?" he asked. I hesitated. I'm here. That's something. He studied me for a moment, then leaned back. You ever need to talk? You know the drill. I left his office with the folder under my arm, heading to the locker room. Inside, the smell of sweat and detergent filled the air. I opened my locker, pulled out my sidearm and checked it. Magazine full, safety on. Just like the night I'd walked in on Emma and Daniel. The rest of the day was a blur of forms, signatures, and brief conversations with officers who didn't know how much to say. But as I was leaving, Officer Ramirez, one of the few I'd call a friend, caught up to me. You okay, Cap? It was the way he asked it, not just out of respect but concern, that made me pause. Define okay, I said with a half smile. He didn't push, just clapped me on the shoulder. We've got your back. Always. Driving home, the street seemed sharper, the air colder. I realized then that the station, for all its noise and chaos, had felt easier than the silence waiting for me at the house. When I stepped inside, I left the uniform on the hanger in the hallway and sat down at the kitchen table. I stared at the badge for a long time. That little piece of metal had been my compass for nearly a decade, pointing me toward justice, order, control. But it couldn't point me toward trust. That I'd have to rebuild on my own. That night, instead of sleeping on the couch, I walked into the bedroom. The bed was stripped bare, the mattress cold. I lay down anyway, staring at the ceiling. The smell of Emma's perfume was faint now, just a ghost of what it had been. I thought about the men in the cartel, about the way they looked at me when they decided I was one of them. I thought about Daniel's face when I opened that door. The strange thing was, the fear in both moments felt the same. Sometime past midnight, I realized that survival isn't always about making it through danger. Sometimes it's about living with the damage after the danger's gone. A week passed before I realized I hadn't once opened the top drawer of my nightstand. Inside was a bundle of letters, some from Emma, some from Daniel. Old things. Birthdays, thank yous, jokes scribbled in sloppy handwriting. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled them out. The words were still the same, but the meaning had shifted. What once felt like warmth now read like a performance. I thought about tearing them up, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the part of me that still believed the past had its place, even if the people in it had changed. I put the letters back and closed the drawer. That morning I took a walk through the neighborhood. People waved from porches, kids rode bikes past me. Life hadn't noticed the hole in mine. I passed the park where Emma and I used to take Sunday walks, the bench where Daniel once told me he was proud to be my brother. It all looked the same, but the weight of those places had doubled. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table with my badge in one hand and my service weapon in the other. Not in any dangerous way, just holding them, feeling their weight. These two objects had defined who I was for most of my adult life. One represented my duty to the law, the other, my ability to enforce it. But neither had protected me from betrayal. I thought about the night I caught them, how the room smelled faintly of Emma's perfume, how Daniel couldn't look me in the eye for more than a second, how the gun at my hip had stayed there, loaded, silent. It struck me then, restraint is its own kind of strength. Anyone can pull a trigger, not everyone can walk away. Later that day, Ramirez called. We're having a cookout at my place this weekend. You should come. Bring a beer, bring yourself, no uniforms, no shop talk. I almost said no. Crowds weren't what I wanted, but something in his voice reminded me that isolation was a choice, and not always the smart one. I'll be there, I told him. When the weekend came, I stood in Ramirez's backyard surrounded by people who didn't know, or didn't care, about the details. They just knew I was one of theirs. For the first time since coming home, I laughed. Not the forced kind I'd used undercover. A real one. Short, but real. Driving back that night, windows down, the air cool against my face, I realized I didn't need to erase what happened. I just needed to stop letting it be the only thing I carried. At home, I hung my uniform back in the closet. I placed my badge on the dresser where I could see it every morning. These weren't just tools anymore. They were reminders, not of what I'd lost, but of what I'd managed to hold on to. My control, my integrity, my line in the sand. As I turned out the lights, I glanced at the empty side of the bed. The emptiness didn't feel as sharp now. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was the start of it. I thought about something my father used to say when I was a kid. You can't choose what hits you, but you can choose what stands back up. That night, I understood it. Because I'd been hit in the only place I thought was untouchable. And I was still standing.